Maybe he will say, no, don't enter. Now they want to be alone, people come to me. No, but I'm very friendly. I like people, I like to talk. I want to talk, and actually having the show, the day of the opening, it was awesome. People talk about my work and blow my mind. Like when you have a show in the city of Vancouver, and I'm talking in Vancouver, they hate it so much. I hate Vancouver. I'm a hater.
I'm a hater, but it's not a hate.
But never. You do a show, you work like crazy. Nobody talks to you about your work. And here, people say things that they happen. They told me things about my work that actually I couldn't sleep at night. Like somebody said that they were torture chambers. And I said, whoa, amazing. Actually, they are.
So I think what's interesting too, in terms of what Germaine has said now, Dina, is you bring your practices with you.
Exactly.
And there's a continuity there, obviously. As Germaine was saying, it's sort of being closer to the natural world and the systems that are always part of your work. And I think for you, you've always been recycling materials,
Exactly.
but now you're recycling here, and it's not just a material, it's actually wood that grew on the property, that was cut down, made to build the house, and then you took it up again.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of much more wholesome and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to answer that question, how you adapted to making work here on Salt Spring?
I mean, when you were speaking, I was thinking about the fact that you gathered these pieces together from the construction of something new, both in the artwork and within your practice. I was also using material from Salt Spring that I've been working with this one base cedar tree that had to be felled because the center had rotted out and it was next to a building. And that's provided enough material for me to work with for an entire year. And then the fact that your work is representing in kind of in a digital way, also this element of
The same material.
exactly the same material, and then we have like the sort of tidal reference of time and duration and east to west, along with the poetics. And I don't know whoever seeded this panel, but it almost materially flows from one end to the other. Okay, well, it was planned.
So smart.
Almost kind of this
It's like she
material
planned it.
translation from a kind of rebuild to a more fluid and poetic reference in place.
Anyone else want to respond to that question of how you've had to adapt? I know some of you have been here longer than 13 years, I think you're saying.
Yeah, and I grew up in Howe Sound in a community with 12 people. So I remember when I was moving here from East Van, people were like, "Do you think you're gonna be able to survive?" And I said, "You know, it seems pretty big compared to where I grew up." And when you're a kid, you're living in a town with 12 people. You don't leave that town. Like people are like, "Oh, it was close to Vancouver and this and that," and it's like, no, you got off the school bus and yeah, there was 4 kids. And by the time I was finished elementary school, there was 2 kids, me and my brother. So it's one of those like, yeah, it was tiny.
So what was adapting to Salt Spring like for you, particularly for your art practice?
I still consider this a suburb for me. Like my artistic practice is still connected with Vancouver, but also just connected. My life has never changed. I'm constantly going back and forth for work. When it comes to nature, I think I was in nature more than most kids. My brother and sister wouldn't go hiking and stuff where we lived. I was in the wood. Like Saturday morning, I'd open the door, food in my hand, and I'd come back when it got dark, and I'd be by myself the whole time. So it's that sort of thing. I would say the West Coast has definitely influenced my art. And then the one thing, my creative process is never in the studio. It's either manual labor or walking. And so the West Coast has always influenced that. It's all my big ideas my entire life have always been either working, manually digging and stuff, or on a long walk. And it's quite often in nature. You're just thinking things in your head and then they come to you.
It's really nice. I mean, I really appreciate when artists talk about their practices not being in the studio and the idea of walking, processing, looking, observing, that is a part of the work as when you're actually physically making it, right? And that's also so much of it. Sometimes when you do that, you don't even know what you're going to make until you get to the material in a way. So I really appreciate you referring to walking.
Yeah, for me, I would say, people ask, like, am I in the studio figuring things out? Usually not. Like, I know exactly. It's been years of work. Before I would just write down the ideas in a book, and I have this series of binders that my friends all know about. And that was 30 years of not making anything visual, just writing down visual ideas. And it's that thing of, when I go into the studio now, I know exactly what I'm going to make.
You got the binders.
I have the binders to depend on, those are all individual ideas, but when I went to make this, I knew exactly what it would look like. There'll be slight nuances as things change and stuff by accident, but I pretty much know what I'm going to make.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Patrick, how has making work on the island been for you in terms of, has there been an adaptation?
I've never made work off the island. I wasn't an artist. I became an artist in 2015. And this is only my second conceptual piece. So I made most of my life as a commercial illustrator and working in that industry. So I always felt that when I moved back to Salt Spring, I grew up here, and then I went away and I came back. At some point, I was realizing that I didn't really want to become an artist. It just seemed like hassle, you know? It just really seemed like a hassle. It seemed like a lot of, it really did, and frankly it is. I mean, but it's not as much a hassle as what I did before. So, no, in 2015 I decided that I was tired of being a commercial illustrator and that I would create my own work, which I began doing. And, but you know, I mean, I lived on Salt Spring for so many years. I lived in Saturna for a lot of years. I lived in Victoria for many years. I've lived the vast majority of my life on islands. I've only been on the mainland for maybe 3 or 4 years out of my life. So, so sadly, our beautistries hold like no thing for me because it's so ubiquitous. You know, I feel kind of bad because people come in and go, "Wow, it's beautiful." Like, yeah, I guess. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of. Not that I don't like our beautistries. I mean, that'd be known. I do love our beautistry, but I think there's always been a distinction between are you a Salt Spring artist or an artist who lives on Salt Spring? And I think this show is particularly interesting in that regard because. When I came here, I was welcomed by the artistic community, and there was sort of a bifurcation between artists that really were responding to the environment of the art, whether it showed up in the images that they were using, if they were working representationally, or it worked into some of the shapes they were creating, if they were doing sculptures or ceramics. It was very much informed by it. And then there were other artists that were creating work that they probably could have created if they were living in a large city. It was more the lifestyle that this island afforded them. In other words, they weren't paying a lot of money for a studio. They had the opportunity to live in an environment where you had a little bit more connection to your neighbor. So there was a sense of that community. So I think there's that kind of two distinct things. And myself, I'm here because, I was going to say, we'll get to my piece in a moment. But yeah, the sense that if you want to be an artist, there is a sense that you will find community and a kindred support, which in this regard, when I first moved here and came back to the artistic community, it was an instant embrace. And since I've been here, I've had the opportunity to show, to create, to teach, to curate, do so many things that if I lived in Vancouver, I probably would be kind of limited in that regard because I don't come from an art school background. So I'm very grateful that on the island, if you have an idea to do something, there's a great opportunity to do it. And that, I think, opens up so many doors because you don't feel as though you have to create work based on your socially constructed identity. You can reinvent that identity by having a different kind of social construct. So in that regard, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And that's why I think the show is very interesting because 5 years ago, I curated a show here of 50 local artists. And it was, for the most part, people who were working representationally and were working from a certain kind of modality. And now to have all of this conceptual work entering the gallery, I think is really interesting because it feels as though there's a shift happening on the island right now when we've reached this point where there's sort of a passing of the guard, you know? And I mean, I was here at the opening and I said, you know, if they drop a bomb here, they're going to kill half the Gen Xers on the island. I've never seen so many people in their 40s and 50s on the island before, it was interesting. And there again, it's also interesting to see that this is Salt Spring art now, which I think is exciting. And and I'm very privileged to be part of.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I have this quote I just want to read to you, and then I'd love for you to respond to it. It's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. And she said, to love a place is not enough. We must find ways to heal it. And I feel like with each of you, there's a quality of healing, there's a quality of engagement with the natural world. So I'm wondering if anybody would like to respond to that question about, to love a place is not enough, we must find ways to heal it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think I have a sense of nostalgia because when I was growing up here in the 70s, there was a great sense that there was, there was draft dodgers, there was hippies, there was farmers, there was back to landers. There were people that were trying to find a very alternate approach to their lifestyle. And there were people who had a very, very conservative approach to lifestyle. But the one commonality was it was only about 3,000 of us. So you really had to make a point of getting along. And that meant that, if there was a great amount of snow and somebody couldn't get out of their driveway, or a tree had fallen down their driveway, you went over there and just got it out of the road, And there was that sense, I recall very clearly when I was about 12, one of the kids that I grew up with Fulford went missing. And the entire island literally descended on Fulford Harbor. Hundreds of people. All the teachers from the school ended up in my house because they were having shifts of people going over all parts of Ruckle Park looking for this child. So it wasn't a question of like, well, do we have search and rescue people? Do we have... No, it's just like, you're here, this is the person from your community, and you'll go through the woods with a stick trying to find this kid. And that was really made a huge impression upon me as a child, because it wasn't the sense that, well, that's somebody else's problem. This is everybody's problem. And so for that period of time, I definitely felt that the idea was that you can come here, you will be welcome, but you join the community and you volunteer, or you do something, and you're not here just to be isolated, you're here to become part of the greater community. And no matter what your lifestyle is, and no matter what your outlook is, or your appearance, or what you get your money, that's not important. But, you gotta come down and flip burgers at the Lions Club, because that's what we need to do.
So is this part of the healing that quote I read is about for you, like the healing of community?
I think in that sense that, you have to consider that, you put a group of people together, and we've all heard the adage that Salt Spring is an argument surrounded by water, and it's becoming really apparent to me in the last few days. But I think that's the point. I think that's the salient point, is that you do get a group of people together. One of the conflicts around Salt Spring is a lot of people move here because they don't want to be around people. If you're living in a crowded part of North Vancouver and you think, I just want to get away someplace, I don't want to be surrounded by people, you move here. Well, that's fine, but then the contrast is that, well, are you then, part of the community? So we do have a lot of conflicting and polarizing views. That's become really apparent post-pandemic. We saw our community really fragmented throughout the pandemic. And, it happens in a global sense, but we feel it here in a local sense. When friendships, long-standing friendships, have been fragmented over things like vaccination and things like this. And so there has never been a time, in my opinion, that this community has ever needed more healing than it needs right now. So I think whether it's this show, whether it's what people are trying to do in the community, what you mentioned earlier regarding Gail's address, this is a time where we need to find ways of healing. And every one of us, I think, has some, because let's face it, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And I think when I see the kind of hatred and acidity on things like Facebook and think, okay, fine, that's what you can do behind a screen, but how are you going to treat your neighbor? How are you going to treat someone in your actual community? And now is more than ever the time to decide that you've got to stand up and have a relationship with these people in this community. You might not like all our political views or our lifestyles, but we're here, and we all belong, and I feel safe here.
I feel like that's one of the reasons that I was part of this show. Like, I think that, I've been going back and forth to Vancouver since meeting my partner, that's 16 years, that's now 16 years, and I feel like I was going back and forth without ever really committing to kind of being here. I think I was one of those people who was just coming to get away. And at some point, I think it started to feel like, okay, if I'm going to be here, like I've been almost full time since the beginning of the pandemic, then I think I should have a responsibility to start to participate in this community and do some things. And so I was glad for the invitation from Annika to start to become part of like an active part of the art community. We're doing it also through things like we've devoted because everyone on Salt Spring, first thing I understood was everybody has to have a produce stand. So we made a little produce stand outside of our house, but it's more like a production stand. So we use it to show, to like bring various thoughts, like we did a plein air session earlier today. And so I think that's like how we're trying to be part of, participate in putting some thoughts out into the world here locally.
I actually have a second, I still want to stay with healing because I feel like it's a really important part of it, but the other thing I was wondering about in your bio, you talk about climate anxiety, Germaine. So I'm wondering, can you say something about how your work speaks to climate anxiety? Because I feel like it's also part of this larger question about healing, and in terms of actually looking at what's actually going on in the world and how do we address it, and how do we address it through art, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a question, that anxiety that hangs over a lot of the work that I try to do. A lot of my work involves, like this work in the show, is using kind of sensors to bring the environment into the gallery, make us kind of aware of these systems around us that we may not think about every day, and maybe in some way kind of acknowledge that anxiety and anticipatory grief that we're carrying with us in face of climate change and so on. So I've got like things like tables that will shake when there's earthquakes in the Pacific Northwest, or light, taking control of the lights of a room and dimming it in relation to the sunlight and so on. So this will be the first of a series of like domestic scale versions. So you can live with it all the time in your house if you want to. Yes, indeed. So, I mean, maybe it's not exactly healing yet, but I think like maybe it's like a 12-step thing. You have to go through all the anxiety and the grief and all of that before there's the healing. And so that I think that part of like making a work like this that I'm sure is getting on their nerves by the end of the day is maybe like a preliminary step towards what might eventually be healing, right? Unsettling first before healing.
Right.
So.
And unsettling, I think, is part of just recognizing that there might be illness, there might be sickness, there might be something that's unbalanced, right, in some way. John, or do you want to speak to the idea of healing in your work, or you're bringing attention to climate?
Yeah, I don't think it's in my work. I think it's living on the island and watching the climate change is a tricky one. I spend a lot of time in the woods, on the farm and stuff like that. It's the things like the cedar are leaving.
The what?
The cedar are leaving.
Right.
It's things like the tree in my piece, it will be gone. Like there's no stopping that. My neighbors are planting trees from Northern California and Southern Oregon right now. And it's one of those things like, it's just in the back of your head, you try to avoid it, there's no avoiding it. You go to Rackle and, there's probably a few thousand trees dead because they don't pull them out because it's park. And it's that sort of thing of like, it's there. Like I see it with my kids, they talk about it, they're teenagers and they're constantly being fed it now, but it's the thing of, it's visually appearing, which is one of those, you can read about something that's happening in the world, but when you see it actually happening as you're going through it.
Right.
Yeah.
In your bio, you talk about how your work is about creating a sense of place. So how do you think your work does that in relation to these conversations we're having?
It's a little more conceptual. Place for me is in my mind. I've traveled quite a bit. I've lived in different places. The more I travel, the bigger the space in my head gets, but it's all still me. So it's one of those, I can think about London, England, but it doesn't seem like it's far away to me. It's, it's that sort of the scope in my mind of like the world, and the more I see of the world, it becomes more, you own more of it, and you're responsible for more of it, I would say.
So when you use the word place, you're not necessarily speaking about this particular place.
I'm talking about the place in my mind, which is grows as I travel.
And it's informed by all of
Yeah, all the stuff, and you take it all in, and it's different everywhere you go, but it all makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Liljana, what are you thinking about this question of healing or climate anxiety?
I was listening to what everyone was saying and kind of putting it into a larger framework or map of how people interact with this subject, and because I think it's incredibly current and something that has only been our awareness of climate, our awareness of the concept of environment, but also the integration of our role within a natural ecosystem of events and reactions and materials and energetic exchange. And I'm involved in those things on multiple levels, not just within the practice, which is also the title of which is Cedar Chorus and speaks to what you were just mentioning, but also I work with an incredible group of science communicators, scientists and artists who are working to actually build literacies around climate change in the BC region and specifically the Gulf Islands as well. And and that's one group, and I also run a periodical called Biomass that hosts different types of perspectives and voices on the realities of creative labor and energetic exchange as it relates to art practice. And then within my work, my day job, because art is very difficult to survive on alone, I also work for a conservation lab on biodiversity conservation. And we work on Salt Spring Island, but we work throughout the Gulf Islands looking at the changes that are occurring in real time and that are only increasing with things like temperature and the existence of carbon. So I think about these things all the time, and I think about different ways that remediation can be brought both through how we relate with community on that level, and to go back to your point on healing, and also that brilliant text from Sweetgrass, or Reading Sweetgrass, that text was very impactful, I think, for bringing awareness to this conversation. And so I think it's worth mentioning also that we're, as people living on these islands, that Indigenous perspectives are also being brought up as part of this remediation process in order to move forward. People like us, we have, like myself, I have to become more aware of those types of histories and perspectives in order to actually heal properly. I think you can't really contemplate land without contemplating the history of land and who has been actually caring for and cultivating those lands, and who was responsible for the perseverance and survival of many of the most, important ecosystems that are holding us together, that are allowing us to have the beautiful views and vistas and landscapes that we enjoy, but actually took millennia to cultivate and very, very little time to destroy. So I think it's important to pay attention to that too.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah, please.
Or maybe you want to say something to that.
No, you go.
Okay.
I want to organic and this is
Okay. Well, for me, the healing part is like when I'm being a doctor, is when I look for garbage. It's very interesting to see what is the garbage that the island do. My dream is exhibition will be bring all the garbage to the middle of the plaza and say, this is us. This is what we do. Do a beautiful sculpture with all the cars, engines, all the stuff that we do, that we live in the land. I'm looking in our land, we have 3 acres, and I'm looking for stuff to take care, like if it's something that is doing, that I think is doing bad to the
your stuff, you mean things that people have left on the land, like
Yeah, I'm really
art
interested.
or-
Before in Galliano, and we will go for walks, and I would say, wow, how many tents are everywhere, like the tents, the plastic, that
Tarps? Tarps.
They translate the machine. Those tarps and cars, so many, like, because we are in an island and you can take it out, they stay here, and they make some type of garbage. They totally influence the flora and the fauna. It's good. Yeah, it's that is, and because I'm a culture junkie, I always thinking like do an object or something with the stuff we found and try to make it visible, more visible.
So part of the healing is like remediation, as Liljana was saying, but it's also making it more visible, so we actually become more aware that we're not, like as Patrick was saying, living isolated in our community or in our homes, but we're actually connected to each other. You know, so this is like a visible way to make that manifest.
Yeah, and it too, if you want, is like we don't need so many things. Like we are buying stuff that we bring to the island. We don't need it. And
It's harder to get
capitalism,
here.
and it's all capitalism, and at the worst, like if we want to clean up, I think you need to ask, I really need this.
Or you need to ask the land for your materials.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's wonderful. One of the other questions I want to ask, because Liljana, in your bio, you talk about using a blend of repurposed synthetic materials and ethically sourced raw elements such as naturally fallen trees, and that you're interested in questions around land degradation while envisioning possibilities for fostering more equitable relationships with our local ecosystems and non-human kin. You said that.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So, you know, I really appreciate all the things that you're doing that kind of speak to location or relocation more broadly, but I'm wondering specifically with your work, how do you feel that your work navigates these questions around, particularly you talked about land degradation and more equitable relations. So how do you imagine your work doing that?
You know, yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's impossible on some level for art to do that. But I feel what art does, or what sort of visual representations of these ideas do, is that they show a kind of playful sort of experimental space where we can try out different combinations of material ideas and conceptual ideas, and actually see visually for people who are visual, which are many of us, whether something works or not, or thinking through things materially kind of allows us to consider whether, you know, questions arise that you might not have arrived at kind of like through writing or conceptually. So that's how the artworks function for me, is that I find space within that practice to explore questions that I don't actually have the answers to, and that I don't know what a resolution exists for, and at the same time, new questions emerge that I might not have arrived at through another process, and that's also kind of where it becomes playful, or where it becomes an uncomfortable feeling even. So I almost find that if the artwork is making me feel a little weird, then it's doing something good. Like if it makes me feel like, what is that, you know, then I know that I'm going in a good direction.
That's a really nice way of putting it. I think about my own practice and how I love making work. I mean, I love showing work, but I like making it more. And I like that spaciousness that, you know, each of you is describing about being able to explore things beyond language or outside language. Also that by making something that comes from your own creative process and not knowing and being uncomfortable, it's actually an opportunity to think otherwise, right? So there's something about just being in the space of making, because so often when we see art, we see the finished product, but it's actually all of the things that inform it that I wish I could share with people as well. I mean, you can, if someone asks you a question about your work, you know, we all can start talking about it, but it's that process part, the notion of walking, this kind of spaciousness of being in the environment, I feel like is such an exciting part of being an artist, whether in the city or in a more rural setting, right? But there is something about this setting that makes me look down a lot more and makes me look up a lot more, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. Yeah. I have a question for Patrick. It's a really general question, Patrick, but I know you're going to have an answer for it. Can you talk about Passages, your series of installations on the major arteries connecting most of Salt Spring Island to the ferry terminals? And if you want to, you can also talk about what has unfolded in the last few days around your practice and the reactions that have evolved in response to your work.
That was a general question. Yeah, sure, thank you. I appreciate that, the opportunity. Yeah, the Passages installation, I guess, that I created came about quite a while ago. I was reflecting on when I was growing up here. My father lived with us, but he worked in Victoria. So he'd get up every morning and he'd leave and he'd come back either that night or maybe a week or so later. And so in the winter months, he would never see the island in the light. And so I realized that when he was coming back to the island, especially the island in those days, he was coming into a very different environment than when he was a fire inspector. So he would put on a uniform and he would disappear and he'd come back and take off his uniform and become my dad. So I thought about that and what it must have been like, because I was reaching the age where he would have been the same age when I was growing up. And I thought about that, like the idea of you go away and you come back. In those days, we'd only go into Victoria maybe once every couple of months. So it was a big deal, a really, really big deal to go into town. So I thought about that, and then one day I was driving along on the way to the ferry, and I thought about a sign that said, "Your father is a good man." And then I thought about that, and I thought, what if I came off the ferry and it said, "My father was a good man"? If I created those signs, people would drive by them, and they'd begin to think, was my father a good man? No. Is my father a good man? What is a good man? And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. So I thought, I'm going to make these signs just for the hell of it and put them out there. So I made these signs at home, and this is like about 4 years ago. And I went out in the middle of the night, and I was amazed by how much traffic there was. Because I was sitting like, trying to get away with it, right? And the cars were coming by and I'm hiding. So I ended up putting them up, and they were gone in about a week. So I thought, one of these days I'm going to do that again. So when I had the opportunity to do the show, I thought, okay, that's kind of neat. I'm going to think about thought-provoking statements that you would see one version when you left the island and another version when you came back. So they had switched around the tenses and stuff like that. Now, I had done something similar for a show here a few years back with a whole bunch of sayings, and when I went through them, I thought, well, you know what? If you put something about someone's father and they had a bad relationship with their father, they're going to be driving by that sign every day, right? That's going to be a lot of trigger, and I thought, okay, I don't want to do that. So I went through about 50 or 60, it took me about a week and a half. I went through all these various things to think, what could I put on a sign that would be thought-provoking, it wouldn't be something on a bumper sticker, that wouldn't be triggering. So I came up with the sayings that I did. On the way to Fulford, there was, he is a good man, he was, or they were good men. At Central, there was one that said, your choices, the one that survived. And when you went the other direction, it said their decisions. So the idea is you go in one way, you're making your own decisions, and the way their decisions, their choices. And then the other one was she tries her best, and they tried their best. And she tries their best, that was one that was really for my mom. When we moved here, it was very hard for her. She was alone a lot, and she had a lot of depression issues, and I know that she really struggled. My sister and I had a bucolic childhood here. It was absolutely lovely, but as I grew later as an adult, I could see that it was a hard time for my mom. It was a hard time for a lot of women on the island because the kids were away, and there wasn't much of a community. So really, I thought more about those signs actually having more to do with my folks and my experience here. So anyway, so I went for a walk one day, because you go for walks, and there was a road sign, and I looked in the back, and there's a sticker where the road sign was made, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go to this place and get them professionally made. So I went over to Victoria, talked to the road sign guys, and they said, we'll make whatever you want. I said, fantastic, and so I had the signs made. So then I went out one night and installed all the bases. I had spent weeks finding these locations where they, wouldn't block a path or, any of that kind of thing. And anyway, and then on Friday morning, I went out at 4 o'clock in the morning and installed the signs. And I thought, this is going to be really cool. People will be driving on the way to the ferry, either the Fulford Ferry, Vesuvius Ferry, or Long Harbor Ferry. They see the signs on one way, see the signs coming back the other way, maybe have a conversation, maybe with their kids, or... I really like the idea of kids in cars driving by and the kid going, what's that all about, Mom? And having a conversation, just a conversation. The other thing I was fascinated by, too, was the idea that I remember I reached a certain age where I used to play in bands, and I went downtown in Victoria at the time, and there was a poster for a gig, and it was at this point electronic dance music. And electronic dance music, like the Fillmore posters, 25 years before, were done in a certain way that if you weren't in that particular group, you wouldn't get it. It wasn't a poster that said, appearing at this place. It was very kind of cryptic, but if you were part of that music scene, you'd get it. So it kind of excluded you in that way. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing, because road signs are absolutely not about exclusion. It says stop to save your life. It says this is the playground to save a child's life. You have to understand, and you have to accept. So if you put something cryptic or something, esoteric on a road sign, what's that going to do? Well, I found out. It's going to piss people off. And there was the complaints were almost immediate. Now, in my defense, on the back of each sign, I made a sticker explaining to the Ministry of Transportation and to the folks on the island that do that kind of thing, that it was a non-permanent, temporary sign for an art exhibit, and it was going to be taken down at this time. You can find out more at Mahon Hall. I even used the Arts Council logo, and I put my contact information. I said, if you have any problems with the sign, if you want it relocated, if you want, anything at all, please just contact me directly. And that kind of backfired too, because what that was my email address. So I got 10 emails from people telling me how much they hated them. I got one nice email from an elementary school teacher in Fulford Harbor. She has a grade 6, 7 split class, and she saw it and she said, I'm teaching my kids about protest, so I'd like to know what your signs are about. And that made my whole day. It really did. Because people were like, this is a waste of taxpayers' money, and, Trudeau. And it was all my money. I was not funded by anybody, I can assure you that. So, it was interesting. The complaints came in pretty quick. That particular sign was driven down by a truck. Someone just flattened it. So I guess it was an interesting experiment. I was frustrated because I guess what I was looking for was a community that I grew up in, where there really was a great appetite for whimsy, for creativity, for public art in the wildest possible sense. When I was a kid, my best friend's brothers got together one summer and they built a pirate ship. A caravel pirate ship, and they put cannons on it and a skull and crossbones, and they floated around Fulford Harbor, and everybody just thought it was a great idea. Like, if you remember the Walking on Water contest from Sea Capers, I mean, you could do a lot of crazy shit on Salt Spring Island, and that was the point. Maybe not so much anymore. So I think more than the fact that they were taken down, and I still don't even know where they are. I hope to find some of them anyway. And it was how quickly it happened, but there again, I really didn't anticipate I almost want to say the violence of the response, I mean, I drove by after the opening, I came here for the opening, which was a lovely opening, but I was driving home, that's when I found the sign, it was in the ditch. And I drove by signs for college painting, and I drove by signs for people making granola, and all sorts of other signs, and I thought, okay, well, but I think perhaps some people have suggested that it's because it was done as an actual road sign. If I made them out of plywood and I painted them and stuck them up there. But that wasn't the point. you know, I mean.
Why would that make a difference?
Why would it make a difference?
No, like the fact that it was like a conventional road sign, why was that so?
I think people felt that, I think they were kind of outraged because they thought that if it comes from, you know, a source like the government or Ministry of Highways,
The
taxes,
government
yeah,
want information.
and they don't understand it, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, people get very angry when they don't understand something, and that was seemingly like the outrage, you know, which I thought was interesting. I mean, a lot of people said this is a great success. Well, I guess. I mean, I would hope that they were up for longer than 4 hours. I hope that if anybody wants to adopt one, if you have a home that is anywhere near a public road and you want to adopt one, if I find them, yes, I'll be happy to come and install them on your road, because I would love to see them seen and have the opportunity for people to have conversations about them, at least, and as long as I can. So it's been an education. It's been challenging, to be honest, because it was a reminder, and this touches on the, I think, very, very poignant question you asked earlier about healing. And I think that to me was a sign of just how systemic the amount of anger. Because I mean, I can't blame Facebook, although the Facebook conversations were certainly initially quite discouraging. But the fact that they were gone so fast, like, wow, you know, that to me I thought was interesting. Just how outraged people were by something that they didn't necessarily understand. Because I would have liked to think that we are a community that embraces what we don't understand. This is a great example, right? I don't necessarily understand Maurice, but I sure love it, and I'm glad it's here. And if it was in a public park somewhere, I wouldn't want it gone, you know? I don't want any public art gone. If I don't like it, I can just walk around it, you know? And I think that kind of intolerance is frightening, because that is a form of censorship. And censorship I find very frightening. When you're censoring in a community like this, well, what's going on in Toronto or Calgary or Edmonton, you know? I mean, when we are censoring what you think was the most left-leaning, open-minded, granola-crunching community on this planet, you know, I mean, that was one of the interesting things that I saw in an Instagram that got passed along from Annika, that people in Vancouver think that's a lot of anger at art on an artistic island. And I thought, yeah, it kind of is, isn't it, you know? So anyway, this isn't about me, but it is. That was what I put out there, and that was the response, so.
Wow. Two things come to mind. One is you're talking about, you know, the original sayings, phrases that you wanted to use, and you didn't want anything too triggering.
No.
But it's sort of like, were the phrases triggering? Was the fact that they look like official signs triggering? Like, it's interesting to think about what was it that made, like, I think your comment about that they didn't understand,
Yeah.
and that was the thing where so much of this, you know, violent energy came from.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think if I had printed them on plywood and painted them myself, I mean, they'd probably still be up there. Because there would be that understanding that it's just, you know, even if it was painted quite professionally, people would recognize that it's not. But to me, that is like, I've always loved culture jamming. Like, I was involved with culture jamming a lot because I have a graphic design background. So it was fun to make posters and things like that challenged people, that, you know, you're misusing logos and stuff like that. I find that really provocative and interesting. But not necessarily, you know, I think I like the idea of culture jamming and you know, using things like that, because it's just questioning our reliance and our, you know, our addiction to brand logos and the way that we take in information. So if we're used to seeing something in a certain way, if we see it in a different way, I was hoping for something of a questioning, just to go, wow, I got to stop and look at that for a second.
That's the reason that I personally, because I do a lot of work that isn't necessarily recognizable as art, and I never excuse it as, or I never explain it away by saying it's just, the just is silent, but I don't say it's, you know, it's art, because it's kind of like, it's the excuse for a person not to deal with something, right?
Yeah.
And so by making a thing that seems like an official road sign that, you know, has all the characters, you know, brings people to the meat of the question, rather than allowing them to sort of gloss over by saying, okay, let's just start, and just like, which was, I think, like some of the discussions that I saw was just like, you know, was a kind of along those lines. It's just art, let it be, or let it kind of circles. It bypasses what the actual question and the meat of the piece that you're trying to get at is.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and that was kind of the point, and I really like your point there. I think that there's a certain segment of population, if we go, oh, it's just art, which means I don't need to understand it, I don't need to like it, I just don't want tax dollars to pay for it. Well, okay, but we're a culture, and our culture is our art. So if you're not going to engage with the art is there to be engaged with. It's not just for a small group of intellectuals to get together and create work that we seem to like. It should challenge us. All the art should challenge us. And more than ever, art should challenge us. And if it's just, if it's at a rarefied level where only certain people have access to it or a certain ability to interpret it, that's fine, but that means that the masses are being influenced by Facebook. They're being influenced by Instagram. They're being influenced by corporations. They're being influenced by millionaires. So frankly, that's a lot more terrifying to me than the artists producing work that is a little more thought-provoking.
I was just thinking, just before you said that, I was thinking it's like you've been canceled and ghosted at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think the culture of social media is allowing people to make anonymous comments or say things that don't have repercussions within a community, as we were talking about earlier.
I think our entire panel discussion could be just simply about that, because I think it is. I think honestly we've reached a breaking point, and I'd like to hear other my colleagues pointing in on this, because I think it's hard not to be an artist these days and not have some strong feelings about the impact of social media. As artists, when I started, people said, well, I had an art consultant years ago say, you got to get on Instagram, because as an artist, especially in a rural community, you have to have an Instagram post profile. You've got to be creating that content constantly, showing people the work that you're doing and showing what your work looks like. And like a lot of artists, I hated it. It was just completely contrary to the creative process. And it wasn't me. I was trying to, she said, well, listen, you're a West Coast artist, so maybe you should show yourself like splitting wood and a checkered shirt and stuff like that. I got a gas fireplace. I don't chop wood. I mean, I can chop wood, but it really was. I mean, that just kind of nonsense that we create these and that, but I think we've reached this point now, and I think it's come into legislation in British Columbia right now around things like minors, deepfakes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is now really, really seriously hurting people, not just artists, but young people, people with mental health issues, people that are impacted by poverty, by systemic racism, that this is a mob. This is an ugly, ugly mob. And we only need to look south to see where that goes unchecked. I think more than ever, and this is where it gets really interesting, you think, well, does the government step in and say, this is certainly content you can simply no longer use? But to your point, yeah, I mean, that was what was struggling for me. I think if I had created those things before Facebook existed, people would have driven by and thought, I like it, I don't like it. They might talk about it at the cafe, but there's not going to be suddenly 75 people that are calling up the highways department.
Emboldening each other.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So it was a general question, but I thank you for those very, incredible...
Don't get me started.
But I think maybe in terms of what I asked you, I'd like to ask everyone on the panel. I think, Dina, you mentioned it when someone said your work is like a torture chamber. I'm just wondering if everybody can sort of offer to the audience anything that someone has shared with you about the work in the show that you thought was particularly interesting or insightful or crazy or
I was really impressed with how engaged that audience was at the opening. I saw people looking at the piece. I saw them working through what it was doing and whether it was. I saw them work, and I mean it's calculated on my part. I make work that is kind of like situations that use recognizable objects and that then. That aim to create a space where people can work through the kinds of the content themselves, and yeah, I saw people doing it. I had people come up to me with very specific questions, and I had people detailed questions about the microcontrollers I was using, and so I feel like it felt nice. It felt like there was people,
They want to know.
yeah.
I think also, particularly with this work, even though it's got the kind of controllers and the LED display, something about that level just makes it like we're on its level. Like it's not intimidating in that sense. So there's something about it, like you're right, you're trying to work it out, but it's not a complicatedly visual piece. So it allows space for the viewer to enter into it.
Yeah, to me, like a lot of the work that I do, use found objects or recognizable objects because they're, for the fact that they bring with them a sense of people know how these things work. You know what a level is meant to do. It's clearly, showing that it is not whatever it's, that's your first encounter with it is this thing, whatever this thing is measuring, it's not level. And so then you've got literally these strings that go up to the other thing to tell you, what that's connected to, and then there's the text that's telling you also what it's connected to, and so it's like, hopefully it's a situation that people are capable of, and I have faith that people can do that, because we know this type of object, right, so.
And it's funny.
Yeah, as well. I didn't recognize that it was kind of like a face. And then sometimes it's speaking of social media, sometimes it's side to side slash an emoji, and sometimes it's just neutral.
Sure. John, did anyone say anything to you that was surprising?
I very rarely talk to anyone about my art, other than artist friends that I'm usually with. I'd have to say it's quite a selfish practice that I have. So in each of my pieces, there's always probably 100 little things that I've done in there for myself that I know are in there, but when I actually finally make a piece, it's mostly to present to someone to take their own interpretation from. I have my own reasonings for making it. The final piece of that is actually a photograph of it. So all my final pieces are actually documentation, and it's that twist where then I am the viewer, not the creator. And in my mind, I'm always looking, I'm hoping people will take it and say, they'll look at it and take I am the viewer, so it's that sort of thing of, and I want everyone to be the viewer and take their own things from it.
Right.
But I always have a list of things that I've done in there, and little tricks, and I have all my inside jokes that are my own, but nobody will care.
Artists are fun people.
Yeah, and it's that sort of thing of I'm totally entertained making it, and I have all these reasons why this is going to happen, but nobody really.
But the conversations are always so interesting. I was looking at your work with my girlfriend, and I was commenting on the apparatus that you use to support it, because I usually like those things, and I think so much of when I'm working with students is not just to think about how you're going to show it as you're making it, because often they make it and then it's like, okay, well, how do I hang this from the ceiling? So I was just commenting to her, and I said how much I really like those. I said it added another kind of energy to work, and she said it doesn't need it. And so right away we're having this weird conversation about what we think is in the work. So to me it's about the conversation that happens, whether it's something crazy like it's a torture chamber, or just like why is it doubled, or what am I looking at, where is the original tree? I just to me art slows people down. I think that's what I've been hearing from many of you. And it slows you down enough to be uncomfortable. It slows you down enough to not know, and that's, I think, the space where we can grow when we enter into not knowing.
Well, and in that piece, there are secrets, and it's the thing, every now and then you'll get a viewer that will get it. So it is only one image, the width of your eyes. And if you did cross your eyes, it is 3D, and you'll get kids that will figure that out, because kids will play with everything. So in my mind, it is that idea. It's stereoscopy, so it actually is a single image that your eyes would see, but your eyes do see two different images. And then, but it's a thing, I don't tell people, and every now and then someone will find it, but I like the way they sit as two. Well, no, and it's the thing of it's fun, when you see it work, it doesn't work for everyone, because most people can't cross their eyes, but as a kid, I was fascinated by Viewmasters, which is the little thing that you flick through. It was the same, it was stereoscopy, and those two images would make this 3D, and I loved those. And then would look for them when I was a kid. You'd find them in antique shops, because they used to make them on glass. You had these viewers, but they never had a viewer, but I could cross my eyes and it would work. But my mom and dad were just, nobody else was into it at all, but I thought it was great.
Now you're all moving on.
No.
Still making your stereoscopes. Has anybody said surprised you, or did you expect?
When the opening happened, I only had about an hour, the first hour here, and I talked to a few people, but I was rushing off to another thing, like midway through, because there was a collective dinner to get to. And the young people that were here really responded. I felt like some of the young, sort of emerging Salt Spring artists approached me, and some folks were like, "Oh, we're starting a printing press," and some other young people were just asking, I thought, really thoughtful questions about the work. But it was interesting that there was an age sort of noticeable age difference with that. And I did notice someone senior to myself and senior to perhaps who's up on stage, really looking at them like, what the? But I enjoyed it because I was like, well, it's doing something.
I'm curious how the audience feel like how this show sits in relation to others received by, how it sits in relation to the
Like past
community.
shows.
Yeah, or something.
Sorry, what's the question?
I don't know what the question is. Okay, sorry. I started asking and I didn't want to know what the
You want to know what the audience thinks about this show, or is it more specific?
I think within the context of the history of Salt Spring
Okay.
arts and the
And maybe
past
spring shows.
exhibitions that
Like-
have been here. Yeah.
There's a
Well,
spring show
people
over here.
was telling me that they are very different. This is very different, of course, and they were coming to see like landscapes or things that another time they were showing, and this is more conceptual and different stuff, like very different one another. That they told me they were showing.
Yeah, or maybe it's the people who work here, like Phoenix and so on. Like, is this a different? Was that a very different audience than
Yes.
you're used to? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
Specifically
like it's
for
a
the
self-selecting audience
Right.
that came to, or it's different friends and family because different group of artists or something. It was that's lots of friends and family though then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But more generally, when you're going to have a regular audience, it won't be like the opening night audience.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of artists that are involved in this show, there was artists that are not only new to Salt Spring, but that haven't exhibited within this community. So I think that, like, you guys brought your people, and then additionally, it being a contemporary, more conceptual exhibition, I think brought a lot more people that are curious about what's going on. I think, I haven't been in this position for very long, but I noticed a difference. And certainly it was extremely well attended and extremely well supported.
Right, which sort of points to what Patrick said earlier, that this might be the emerging Salt Spring of our practices, right?
I hope so. I've always struggled with it a little bit because there was a time when, back in the 70s, when my father used to paint. He was in art craft, and there was just packed with paintings because the idea was it was an island of artists, which was true because it was an island of cheap housing, right? So it was, you could move here relatively inexpensively, and if you did pottery or you did painting and stuff like that, well, that's changed a lot. So my big concern was that, and this is what I saw a lot with sort of the people who are in their, later 60s and into 70s, it's getting harder for younger people to move here to continue to create art. And so the notion then becomes, is it like going to Haight-Ashbury and thinking, where are the hippies? You're a little late, right? You'll see tie-dye and you'll see, painted Victorian houses, but let's be honest, the summer love is way gone. But there's still kind of, to some degree, trading on that fantasy. And my biggest concern was that we'd have this fantasy, come to Salt Spring Island and see sheep and rubber boots and lots of artists, but even the sheep are fake. So where are they, like, if you're gonna have that artistic island, have artists. So artists need a scene, know, and they need support, and they need to support each other, and they need a venue, and they need galleries, and they need people who are able to appreciate and support a whole range of art, you know, rather than just stuff that you can sell, you know, for people waiting to go on the ferry. And so I think we're at that tipping point right now, which is going to be, I think, really interesting in the next few years to see all the artists who've come to the island going to bleed out in another 5 years and go, yeah, that was fun, but I'm sick of the rain. Or is there going to be a new renaissance and think, you know, this could still be a great place, and bring in residencies and maybe an art school or workshops, or turn it into a scene again so that it can be revitalized. And I think the next few years are going to be key to that.
For sure.
Yeah.
I kind of want to offer just like a slightly different perspective on that idea of intergenerationality,
Sure.
because I think from a younger generation's perspective, yes, the hippie generation was super influential, and I know that a huge part of this island was established by expats and by people kind of fleeing different types of communities that in order to create something new and to create something somewhat alternative. But I actually think that has continued, and that still continues today, and inevitably the aesthetics around that change. I mean, I don't think that anyone of my generation would I mean, not the majority of people engaged in sorts of environmental movements or class struggle movements or accessibility movements would consider themselves hippies, but of course that's part of the lineage and part of the history, and has been influenced by new information and by new types of publications and visibility. So I just wanted to add that as a counterpoint, or as an inclusion, because I think actually there is a really strong contingent of people here who are looking to live mindfully with the land and are looking to create different ways of life in relation to place, and that will inevitably look different. It doesn't mean that the values have necessarily devolved or disappeared. I actually think they're very present. They just look different, and they should look different. Yeah.
There's another thing I want to say. And it's very important, the work of the curator. Thank you, Annika, for this. With us, you are nobody. No, but I'm saying, like an institution, like you bring curators, they can see like a theme or an idea, and they will find the person that will develop that idea. We are here, everybody's doing like different type of practicing, and I think it's very important the curator part of the art life in the island. I think maybe that is one thing that was different too about another shows, is that Annika have like all these friends that we know her for a lot of times, and she knows our work, and I think curation is great, really important.
And also, as you were saying earlier, the multidisciplinary nature of it. There's so many
Exactly.
different kinds of practices here, which I think is what makes it particularly exciting.
Yes.
I have more questions, but I just wondering if anybody here would like to ask a question of anyone on the panel, or make a comment. Yeah.
I was wondering if all the artists stood up and pointed to their work. We sort of guessed where you are. But somehow we didn't get that, and it just was, we know where you are. And we,
Okay, so
I do this. Mine are the ceramics.
Yeah, Dina has the ceramics. Liljana has the sculptural work here. The green pieces. David in the back there is the two cedar photography light box. Germaine's there, and Patrick's the science.
yeah, thank you. And then there was reference to a few others, and I just wondered, there was
And Randy's back.
yeah.
Sorry.
my collages.
Randy is the collages around the corner. Sorry. I went like this. My eyes just went that way.
Is that helpful?
Yeah.
questions, comments, thoughts?
Tell us. We can take a picture. You want to fight with us? We can take it.
Hold on, Dina, did you take the signs? Okay, I have one
That
idea.
hurts.
I have one idea. Imagine what if at least one of the signs, someone took it because they loved it so much and they've got it in their backyard.
Send an invoice.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Well, the other thing I was thinking of in terms of that was, I'm very new to the island, but I would love for someone to write about it, and to find I don't know what kind of venues are here, maybe I can, talk to people here, but I feel like there's, just to sort of open up the the things that, Patrick, you were describing, I think it would be good to have a conversation about it. There still will be people who just think it's stupid or, whose minds can't be changed, but maybe, especially the bigger context that you put it in about what is the purpose of art, and, art that's not in a conventional space like a gallery. Like, I would love to see something like that.
I know, what is it? Isn't there like an Ask Salt Spring? What is the thing?
It's Meanwhile in Salt Spring.
No, but the official, usually it's Gary Woolman or whatever, or the RCMP guy. Let's have a discussion. Where they talk about the speed of the road and stuff like that. Yeah.
I'm a little afraid, no.
We all put together.
You gotta go Gorilla Girl style. You guys all go dressed like gorillas, and then you ask about the signs if you want anonymity. Or go dressed like fish. What's the most important fish? Salmon. Go dressed like salmon.
I think it's part of a larger conversation. It's important that, in some ways, what has happened here, if it is so provocative, then let's continue the conversation. This is just the beginning of it, right? Yeah, Katie.
I'm just curious how it feels to be, well, one, I feel the show that Annika beautifully brought all these artists to light that, we get to see that they're here. And so I'm curious, I'm also an artist myself, and so I know how I'm delighting in what I'm seeing. So I'm curious to hear the panels, how do you feel to be in this company? And is there any work that you're particularly just excited by, delighted by, fascinated by, you want to go meet them and hang out with them? Like, I'm curious.
Good question.
Well, I would say one of the things with Annika being a curator, she actually brought us together. And it wasn't being brought together once. Annika created the group and then put the group together numerous times. Yeah, we slowly heard each other's ideas, and I think that definitely influenced the growth of the show and brought the show closer together. Whereas a lot of curators would look through stuff that was already made, and make decisions of what those pieces were going to be, and would build their own show around that.
She believed in us.
She was definitely the hub of a collaborative process.
Yes.
And that's
I mean, in that sense, it's like, I think she's not acting like a lot of people think a curator is like, a person that goes and selects these, cherry picks these things, right? It's more like, and here's maybe a return to the conversation around generationality, or like how an art world has changed. Is like, it feels, the way the show came together feels a little more like artist run culture, the 70s or right? Like, it's like not necessarily the past. It's happening now still all the time. Like, people are, young artists have just formed collectives and so on. But and this goes as well to back to the question of healing the place. Is that if stuff needs happening, or if the community needs to shift, or if the artwork that's being made in this community is shifting, and there aren't venues to show it, then someone needs to get together, and we need to get together and make those things happen, right? And it's just it's a thing that artists have done always. Artists will continue to do, right? In Canada, we're lucky that we have a whole history of artist-run centers where people have groups have successfully gotten together to make these things, which are now, to form organizations which are now, part of our collective history. And it feels to me like that's how this thing came together.
Nice. Could I be really cheeky and ask to say something?
Yes.
Of course. Because I'm not on the panel.
It's your show. Go.
You're the curator. You are the curator.
Annika's going to curate the next 5 minutes of this talk. Go.
The healing thing is very important to me.
and I'm glad that you brought it up. When we moved here, I think I knew there was something about, I grew up here like 11 on, but I went to boarding schools and had a bit of a challenging time, as we do in childhood.
In life.
And I came here to raise my kids because it felt the most home to me. And I had like pretty bad postpartum depression. And I had 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a little baby, and I would drive around so they would sleep. And I learned to drive on these roads, and they're very sentimental to me. And so my first body of work out of film, because I come from a film background and I don't do art, was this cyanotypes. And poetry came to me. That was my first art. She was poetry and filmmaking. And I wrote a poem. Can I read it?
Absolutely.
It's called Imprinted. We heal here, held between 2 lines. Traveling at 40 miles an hour restores our lives in the blinding sunlight. Fears are left at the curbside as we peel our trajectory off of our past. The history that we imprint onto this present lasts. It paints our souls and fills our dreams with promises of balance and redirection. Every story can be rewritten.
For sale at the Reasonable. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we didn't even talk about that, but that's something that resonated for me. I want to come back to Katie's question because nobody answered it.
No.
Can I give a shout out to Stasia? I will learn to pronounce it. Apparently, I was her teacher 20 years ago or something crazy.
Like 12 or 13
years ago. Wow, crazy. So I wrote a shout out to Stasia's work. I really think it's beautiful, and I have written about beauty, so I'm not using it in that kind of throwaway way. I just think it's moving. And when I spoke to you near the end of the opening, we didn't get to chat long, but I really appreciated how you talked about this was a seed, this was the beginning of something. And I really appreciate, in terms of the curating of this show, that for some of us, these are things that we haven't shown in public, or we've never shown. You know, I think you said you haven't shown here, so that was really profound. But also, you know, in terms of healing, I really resonated because I looked at each work, and I was, because I've spent some time on Salt Spring and talked with friends about plants and medicinal plants, that I was trying to recognize each one. And then when I was chatting with you, you were talking about part of this work is for you going into the community, meeting different people, learning about plants, learning about healing, medicinal. And so I really appreciate what you're doing here, but I especially appreciate when you said this is like a seed, partly because it is all about plants, but also that it's given you an opportunity to dig deeper into this, to find out more about why you're doing it. And I know in terms of hanging, it's always a challenge because I use the magnets in mine and you use the bowl clips, but there's something provisional there, and I feel like something that I personally value is that when a work isn't fully resolved, but yet we share it with people. Sometimes when our emotions aren't fully clear to us, but we share it with people. So I just wanted to shout out to you because I think it's a beautiful work. Anyone else want to answer this question? Any works that inspire you in particular?
Or just what it feels like, oh, these are my kin, these are my contemporaries. How does it feel to know that you don't have to be in Vancouver to have these people here?
I was deeply honored. I thought it was a mistake. Honestly, I thought she must have me mixed up with somebody else. Because I don't work traditionally conceptually at all. So to be part of this group was a wonderful opportunity to do something conceptual, and I don't come from that background. But I had the idea to do something, and I thought, well, you know, and Annika was so, and I'm sure she was with all of us, so supportive and so open-minded that, you know, I said, I'm going to make road signs, and she says, what are they going to say? I'm not going to tell you. Where are they going to go? I'm not going to tell you. And she didn't know. I mean, she never did know. And I just said, that's enormous faith, right? I mean, it really was enormous faith that I'm deeply...
I saw your film a couple years ago,
the art piece that you did that was conceptual, and that told me everything.
Well, I'm very, very grateful. So, so this was liberating, and it was also thrilling to meet new artists. I thought I knew all the artists on the island, because I've been involved in the Arts Council for many years, and the Painters Guild for many years, and Art Night for many, many years. And then I looked at the list, because when Annika sent it out, she just allowed everybody's email address, and I thought, I literally knew 2 people on the list, and I thought, that's super exciting. Because I was also at that point thinking, well, what is happening to the artistic scene, and to see all these new people coming to the island, bringing new disciplines of work. And I think that the idea of bringing conceptual art into it, I think we still have this bifurcation in society where we have representational and decor abstract, and then we have in the private galleries and the commercial galleries, and then we have conceptual art in the public galleries, and there's still this space in between, which I think is tragic, because conceptual art and the art that we see in the public galleries, it's our art, and we should be able to see it and understand it. But I think in many cases, it's of course a case of people coming in and going, I don't get it. That's okay. Take a moment with it, or speak to a docent, or have the opportunity to have a conversation and realize that you may not understand it initially, but that doesn't negate your opportunity to build a relationship with that piece. And I think that is so important. We have the opportunity to go to Academy Award-winning movies. We have the opportunity to read Booker Award-winning novels, because it's very accessible in that regard. But often award-winning conceptual art is not quite as accessible to the general public, simply because they don't have as much exposure to it. So to be able to see conceptual art in an environment like this, I think is really exciting and vital.
Excellent. Anyone else want to?
I just wanted to say I actually studied Germaine Coe's work when I was an art school student. So when Annika reached out to me to be part of this exhibition, I saw Germaine's name and I was like, yes, yes, yes. But also never would have guessed that would have ever been an opportunity for, the Islanders to know Germaine's work has been canonical within Canadian art for decades. So sort of just, for some time.
6 years.
6 years.
Since the late 1970s, we've had an enormous impact.
A century.
Our student, I was, looking at performance-based practices, land-based practices, experimental artwork, durational artwork, things that are way outside of a sort of norm of fine or visual art, and that was a huge inspiration to me, and it's absolutely an honor to be included in the show.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to get to know.
We're sort of coming to the end, so are there any other questions or comments from the audience?
Are we going?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a conversation that we're having today, and it's where, right now the earth is feeling so valued, and so do we as individuals, but at some stage, how do we, put the priority on healing the land for ourselves? And I know that sounds kind of like, but I think it is a question that I think that I'm sort of observing in the show that you're trying to address, because there is a lot of, often in the kind of nature therapy idea that nature's just the backdrop for us to heal as humans. But in fact, real healing is only kind of laid down in some of our own ideas of, our own concerns, but we actually embrace ourselves as part of the community. And I feel like that, there's elements of that in here. Like I was just looking at the forest bathing thing, because the forest is not a place for bathing. The forest is a forest. We're in there, but the forest bathing almost feels consumptive. It's extractive. Because we're not really question that I feel we do need to ask. And I feel that I'll pay tribute to Liliana's work because I feel that she does ask some of those questions. And that's, I haven't come to the show yet, so I'm really interested to see that. I feel like your work is maybe addressing that. So if anyone just had comment that, it's a good idea.
I didn't understood most of it. But
The
because I can hear.
The importance of healing,
Yeah.
and that we need to do more of it, and we need to not just think about the land as something that we experience or consume, but something that really, like what you were saying earlier about not bringing more junk into the world. Like, how do we find ways to foreground the earth and like not put our egos. I know it's a big interpretation of what you're saying. sort of like, I just wonder if people have any thoughts or comments.
I do have some thoughts. So, I think a corollary to the question that you just asked is like, you know, how, in face of all that is going wrong with this world, like how can one justify making art, or like why make art in face of all of the other things? I mean, sorry, maybe this is like a holdover from all the stuff around Patrick's work. It is kind of like why, in some way, what use is art in face of all of the problems that we have to solve collectively? And to that, I would suggest that you know there's a contemplative function that art provides, and it's why I would continue to make work in galleries rather than just being out being an activist in the world. It's that there's still a value in creating a space and creating moments and creating situations in which we are able to quietly face these kind of like large collective questions. And so, I think that's why. I think that's one of the reasons that I do it. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were getting at.
There's also this element of art sometimes being one of the first interfaces that people encounter new ideas in, and specifically if someone growing up in an urban environment has never actually been to a place like this or had access to the kind of spaces and ecologies that we have access to on island, art or different kinds of representations of our interactions with it can be a first experience or a first idea, or in an educational environment for young people, ideas of nature are very impactful. So that I do think plays, sorry, I'm just trying to put it on, a significant, or can play a significant role in allowing someone to consider new questions in relation to land.
I never think I never think and bring in any type of answer, or I do art because I go bananas if I don't do it. And I believe not everything have an answer or a very clear answer. I make things that don't exist before, but with some type of narrative that have to do with my life. And I'm a human, and I make a product or an object that you can see, and maybe it will say something to you or maybe not, but I think after I make something, that thing have their own life and bring something to the table. That principle helped me. I'm very selfish, but helped me. I try to quit so many times. It's not fun to be an artist at
It's
all.
not. Yeah.
But I go bad.
Yeah, Dina has tried to quit many times. but I hate this.
She's addicted.
I'm quitting. And then, 2 months later, she's like, my head's gonna explode. There's so many things inside there, like drawings, paintings, whatever it is. Yeah. Self-healing.
I don't know. I don't have all these big questions or solutions, or I don't want to show anybody the way to be or the way to think at all. I'm human here. I'm doing my thing. I hope somebody will like it or help them, but I don't know what will happen.
It's gotta be somebody's time.
I turned mine off after my first embarrassment. It's off.
Oh, it's mine.
The panel's over? That's hilarious.
It's my antibiotic.
Take your antibiotics.
I was moving around the I was like, it's over there. It's over there.
That is so funny. Oh my God.
Me,
You're kicked out next year when you banned from
On
the
that
Salt
note,
Spring show.
did you have a question? No, I thought you were gonna. Yeah.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick, when you're describing your work and the situation that happened, and then you're talking about social media, and it's like you're talking about them like they're very separate things. And I had this thought that came to me where it was like, in some ways, like that anger is interesting because the text has been kind of like decontextualized. And it seems like on social media, a lot of that kind of like anger and violence comes from things that have been decontextualized. And that kind of cycles of used for affect.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, we were talking about healing, and I think that one of the great challenges with the internet is we haven't learned to communicate on it yet. We haven't. We know how to communicate face to face. We can be polite to each other. We can have hopefully a discourse. We're more likely to have a civil discourse if we meet face to face. I don't know you don't know me, but I want to find social graces to make you feel at ease with the conversation. Whereas online, it's a totally different thing. And that's as civil adults. We're not even talking about children and teens who are bullied and things like that. So we don't know how to communicate on the form of communication most of us use. And that's causing this, I feel, this enormous rise in hatred because it's emboldening people to be hateful. And until we figure out a way to communicate properly, it's this ongoing concern. And I think the impact on the environment is just the same because, people, if you're concerned about how many likes your kid gets on their Instagram page, what are you really concerned about? We become that much more superficial. My hope is that I remember being a kid and, when there was 3-4 channels of television and you'd watch TV, well, by the time I left home, I didn't want a television anymore because most TV was just kind of garbage. So at some point, my generation just thought, well, none of us had TVs because we didn't really want a TV anymore. And I see more and more young people that are reaching that point where they think, you know what, I don't really need social media. I don't need the anxiety. I don't need the incessant need to communicate. And I'm hoping that we are at the stage now, well, maybe a few years down the road, we'll go, you know what, it was great, but it was just too great a cost, and now we've begun to turn away from it. I remember my dad saying, when he was a kid, they figured that by the 1980s we'd all be in spaceships, wearing plastic clothes and having one pill for turkey dinner. Well, that didn't happen. We decided we still want to eat real food, we still want to eat natural fabrics, and none of us have got a jetpack yet. So I'm hoping that as a species we'll get down the road and think, this was a shitty idea, and we got to change something about it. So, there you go.
I'm just going to, we're sort of coming to the end, and we've been sitting up here under these lights, and you've been sitting down there under those lights, so if anybody wants to ask questions afterward, but I just want to thank everybody here at Mahon Hall for the incredible work that you've done to make this happen. I think you guys are and of course, Annika, for the amazing work you've done, and it's such a pleasure to be here, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Randy.